Deo Patris sic gloria et Filio qui amor nobis surrexita Paraclito in seculorum secula. Veni creator spiritus et des tuorum visita in blessu perna gratia quae creasti pectora qui diceris paranimus altissimi bonum Dei fos vinibus ignis caritas et spiritualis unctio tu sacriformis munere Christus Pater
Okay, everyone. I am John Coleman, and here we are for the June 2025 edition of Christian History and Ideas. And our topic this merry month of June is thoughts on the pontificate of Pope Francis I. And I'm going to just switch the music out to go from the Veni Creator to Gandana Nuata, the Japanese music. So here we are, and I have all these little toggles in here I have to set up as we get going. All right, so grand. All right, indeed, I am John Coleman from Apocrypha Stacys, an Institute for the Humanities and Alternative College and High School here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this live broadcast, thanks to your generosity and recording, indeed, is to get the June 2025 edition of Christian History and Ideas out to you. And this month, we're going to look at our article already mentioned from the Postal magazine. And before we get into this most interesting look at the late pontificate of Pope Francis, a few announcements, and the first of which concerns Apocrypha Stacys, and I'm going to bring this up on our screen share, and that is our School of Theology. So we have classes here in Connecticut and online, and one of those classes, believe it or not, going back some years, is Christian History and Ideas, inspired by this series. And if you enjoy this monthly chat, you'll enjoy it more when you're in class. So in the Christian History and Ideas course, which is a semester-long course with class participation and readings and writings and all the stuff you would look for in a course, exams, um, we will get into these topics. How does Christianity relate to modernity, to the arts and time, and all sorts of these philosophical discussions, often using the Postal magazine, Postil, Postal magazine, as a jumping off point. I've said this probably every recording lately, and I don't take back a word of it. And that is that if you apply yourself to this website consistently, you will have a cutting edge, college level, really, seminar level uh, familiarity with Christian discussions, conservative discussions, humanistic discussions concerning art and philosophy and so forth. There's quite a nice smattering of things on this site. And this is the June edition here. They've lately changed their format. And would you believe it that, by way of advertisement, that I'm here somewhere? Here we go. Alternative and Formal Education's Future. So here at Abacus de Stasius, we're very interested in pedagogy, and so I meditate on certain trends as I see it in the two wings, shall we say, of what calls itself education, the mainstream and the alternative. So there's that, and all sorts of good stuff besides. Speak the music just a little bit higher. There we go. Okay. So with that being seen to now, let's get into our poem. You know, as often as I can, I like to get a bit of poetry or music to kick off our broadcasts. And here in June, we have very often the custom of ordinations. Now, when ordinations are done changes from time to time. For long stretches of church history, ordinations were done around the Ember Days. And in recent centuries, ordinations have tended to be done in late June around the Feast of the Sacred Heart and Saints Peter and Paul. And we have so many great saints for June. I was just marveling at the calendar here. This is the general calendar. Besides the feasts already mentioned, we have St. Romuald, figure in Western monasticism, Saints Barnabas, Charles Lwanga, very unpolitically correct saint, given how he was martyred. Immaculate Heart, of course, Aloysius Gonzaga, always a special one. The Nativity of St. John the Baptist with your bonfires. St. Justin Martyr here on the 1st of June, which is when I am broadcasting. So all sorts of good skins altogether. But indeed, ordinations are typically done towards the end of June around the Sacred Heart, Peter and Paul time. And this is a great poem, The Priest and a Father John, and the author, the poet, is John D. Sheridan, like the Union Cavalry Commander Sheridan. No relation, I should think. All right, here's a beautiful poem, The Priest and a Father John. There'll be priest in him the morrow, troth it's a queer world too, for I mind the rascal that he was, and the things he used to do. Many's a time I chased him when the strawberries were ripe, but I only never caught him, he was faster nor a snipe. He hit me with a snowball once, and that same very hand will be blessing me the morrow, troth it's hard to understand. Long Richard from Caircrubban, who's a sort of far-out friend, is strutting round this fortnight back, just like a hatching hen. McAllister from Calgary, who's no more to him nor me. You think to hear the chat of him, he reared him on his knee. Tom the tailor's nearly bet from hurrying on new suits, and there's powerful heavy buying of caps and yellow boots. The square is thick with bunting, and dear, there's a sight when the late bus from Downpatrick gets in the morrow night. Old Ken and Dan, God bless 'em, will be fussing fit to burst, and the women bait any other to get the blessing first. But Canon or no Canon, I'll say this to his face, for all his bit of purple, he'll take the second place. Sure, even if the bishop come with yon big mitre on, he wouldn't get a welcome that we'll give to Father John. The pains are at me constant now, I seldom cross the door. but I'm crossing it tomorrow if I never cross it more. You can quit your scolding, Julia. I say, and I'm not wise. Sure, the sight of him will ease my heart and gladden my old eyes. It won't be easy bending, and the old knees will hurt, but I'll get down there for Enstum in all the mud and dirt. And if I get a chance at all, I'll whisper in his ear. Oh, I'll do it nice and quiet so that no one else will hear. If anything should happen me before you go away, it's no one but yourself I want to shrive me on the clay. The old canon mightn't like it, for he's still hale and strong, and I'm sure if he'd anoint me, he wouldn't do it wrong. But I'd feel more contented if the hand to bless me when I go was the hand that threw the snowball 20 years ago. And that's The Priest and a Father John by John D. Sheridan. And the book that appears in is Joe's No Saint. So there you go. I always like that poem. And what a great time of the year to get it in. All right. Grand. So here we are. I got to keep an eye on all the tabs up top here. And I'm just going to check the tech, and then we're going to dive right into this month's serving of Christian history and ideas. Okay. Grand. So we have our article here. I'm just going to blow it up and format it, and we'll be off to the races. It's a longer article than we've been lately comfortable with. And of course, we never really read the whole lot of it. But it's certainly worthwhile. And I'll give you a little summary, and that'll wet your whistle to read the whole thing here at the Apostle. So it's Thoughts on the Pontificate of Francis I by Henry Houdet. No doubt I'm mispronouncing that French name. And I know from the name, it rings a bell that we have covered articles by Mr. Houdet in the past. He's the former director of Ethics and Law Department at the Research Center of Saint Cyr Military Academy. He is the author of several important works on philosophy, most recently a philosophy of war. Grand. All right. And there's a lot of articles here on the Apostle that are not originally composed in English. And I can't say whether that's the case with this or not. It obviously is a French name and a man with a French background, given where he's worked. But in any case, I think that's actually one of the geniuses of this Apostle magazine, is it gets you insights from other parts of the world. And that's going to be very appropriate towards the end of this article, where the author talks about or imagines perhaps the appraisal of Pope Francis, Lord of mercy on him, towards the so-called traditionalists of North America. Again, it's a cultural look that if you're in North America, you're not going to get. And so we will nibble away at that. Something else that I wonder is how come, and I have no way to answer this because he doesn't in the article. I don't know if he's priming the pump himself or this question down the road, but how come Pope Francis is referred to as Francis I when there is not a Francis II? I don't know if that's just a flub, because you don't, if you're the first king or pope or whatever with a certain name, you don't use the numerals until there's been multiple of them. So I wonder about that, but there's really nothing I can do to answer that question. In any case, I'm going to open up here with his remarks and then give just a boil down. It's laid out very nicely, so that'll be easy enough. And then we'll get into the real insights here as we get intimate with this piece, intimate enough to go and read it for ourselves. By the way, this is linked below in the description. Okay, the Pontificate of Francis I, which ended in April of 2025, has been the subject of diametrically opposed, often passionate assessments, with praise and criticism that are often difficult to evaluate. Many focus less on the reality of his work than on, well said, various perceptions that have been created. which likely have little to do with reality. The only useful thing is objective truth, and that is what we are seeking. Because an accurate assessment of this pontificate will be very useful to decision makers, as it requires a comprehensive overview of all the problems of our times. My intention is to focus on the substance of his ideas. There's our thesis. Good readers, right? We've identified his thesis. We want the substance. We don't want Joe Blow internet guy, what he thinks about Pope Francis. We don't want CNN weirdo, CIA weirdo telling us what the cathedral thinks, right? We want the actual substance of the Pope's ideas. So many people have focused only on his communication, his style, his shortcomings. Since Leo the 14th has his own style and a more classical communication, it is useless to elaborate on what in Francis was making so many people upset or distressed. That's an interesting question. And I think the answer may have to do with maybe the attempt of the Latin Church and the Catholic Church in general to incorporate every group. I mean, that's very Catholic of it, and try to baptize everything. And so what you end up having are a lot of these camps in certainly in American Catholicism, but I think in general, that don't speak to each other. Obviously, I know the American situation best. That don't speak to each other. Also here in America, and this is appropriate, having praised a certain international perspective in this publication, obviously we'll find out that the North American so-called traditionalists, didn't go down very well with the late Holy Father, and yeah, so part of that probably has to do with a general lack of catechesis and integration of various groups within the church, and also something that's definitely happened across the church is that you have different groups that are not talking to each other at all. And then also proper to North America, proper to these United States, you also have a lot of legacies of the Cold War, which people have not even begun to examine as to how that has affected Catholic culture. Perhaps I'll have an article for the Apostles someday on this point, because as the Cold War recedes, the chances of that coming to the fore are little, and yet they very much press on the strange ecclesial dynamics here in these United States. Okay. Anyway, the thoughts that follow, looking at the substance of Pope Francis's pontificate, will therefore cover various topics: political issues, the constitution of the church, religious pluralism, moral issues, and liturgical issues, of which we'll look at 4 and 5 in particular. These initial thoughts allow for a nuanced and positive conclusion about the pontificate, but they would also be incomplete if we did not also seek how the church could use, in order to make progress, criticisms Francis received. Okay, so I'll just briefly summarize this, or dare to do so. So with political issues, the author brings out really what he sees as our time, this generation, probably the next generation, the end of liberalism. Liberalism and the atomized individual that can be anything he wants without any obligations to society has ended in a bunch of castrated kids and OnlyFans models and addiction and college loan crises. And would you believe it? Selfishness doesn't make people very happy. And this unhappiness manifests itself in all sorts of ways, probably far less dramatic than some of the groups and behaviors just mentioned. So we're at the end of liberalism. It's what is it? I don't know what it is. I'm in America, and I keep saying that we don't have a country here. We really don't. We're just people that are living around each other. We're shopping around each other predominantly. We don't have a country anymore. And I dare say that's the case in much of the world. And it will continue for various reasons, not the least of which is telephonic media. So we have this weird dynamic where, yeah, we're just a bunch of people shopping around each other across the world. We have no country, no religion, no families, and yet we have a strong police force that will that will maintain liberal order, a strong military that'll bomb the hell out of you if you dare act up. And that's liberalism, and that's what 300 years of selfishness and narcissism have gotten us. So anyway, getting back to the papacy, Francis realizes that we're at this transitional point. That's a part of the first section here. And then there's a meditation on the constitution of the church, where the author praises the church as being certainly the best combination, building off of some of the classical pagan authors and their meditations, the best combination of democracy, oligarchy, nobility, and monarchy. And that segues into a discussion of synodality, actually, in a sense, being a sacrament or a visible manifestation of that marvelous synthesis of democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy that you see in the church. Okay, then there's a point about religious pluralism, and as the author says in part 3, it takes two to build a relationship. It only takes one to make a war, and it is obviously the policy of the Catholic Church to try to make the different communities, then different civilizations agree copostatically with each other. Grace builds on nature, and if there's undue tension between different communities, including religious communities, this is going to make the spread of the gospel fundamentally harder. And so within that, you have the discussion of the Abu Dhabi Agreement and the nature of resurgent Islam, which is hardly as how should we say, germane as Christianity is towards the other religions. And so there's a meditation on that. And in all of these points and the three following, the author certainly does not take the typical internet conservative Christian take on the matter. He sees these things, as he said in the previous paragraph, as fundamentally positive, hardly the ruptures that loudmouths, that's my term, were trying to make it out to be for, I don't know, internet celebrity. There's another article, The Professional Catholic, the YouTube Catholic. Enough said there. Okay, and then moral issues, we'll get into that, and liturgical issues, so I won't summarize them because we'll get it from the horse's mouth. And then healthy criticisms of Pope Francis. All right, so there we go. Always want to check the tech, and we're grand. Check the audio. Okay, this happened to me a few days ago. I was broadcasting, or so I thought, for 20 minutes, and then I ducked in and realized the camera had ducked out, shall we say, and that's very frustrating to not only have to excise the dead airtime, but also then re-record the thing. Kind of throws off your morning. Okay, so I'm just skipping the parts that I just summarized. I leave it to you and encourage you very much to check out the actual text. Okay, so now we get to moral issues, rational eudaimonianism. I don't know what eudaimonianism is, and neither do you. So you can get off your high horse, and we're going to find out, courtesy of the CIA, Google, that eudaimonianism is a system of ethics based on moral values, on the likelihood that good actions will produce happiness. Okay. Judging by the titles of many of his documents, Pope Francis I, again, very interesting, he calls him Francis I, though there be not a second yet, placed himself in terms of ethics in the philosophical tradition of rational eudaimonianism, which corresponds on the supernatural level to a spirituality of praise of divine love and the joy of love and fraternal love. Let's take a look at some of these titles here. Gaudete et exultate, in the imperative case, rejoice as a command, and exult, Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, although in Latin it appears backwards to an English speaker. So, the joy of love. Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. Laudato Si, this time in Italian. Actually, the next two, Laudato Si, I praise you, from one of the poems, I think, of St. Francis. Fratelli Tutti, brotherhood, something with the brotherhood there, I should think. And then Delexit Nos, he has loved us, etc. This philosophically is very Thomistic. I bet you never heard that in regards to Pope Francis. Very Thomistic and spiritually very Franciscan. This certainly corresponds to the need for a positive presentation of morality, which too often, according to the nominalist tradition, has been primarily a matter of conscience, of a face-to-face encounter between freedom and law, of duty. I see. Little interesting punctuation there. Right. So the nominalist tradition is what you see, definitely in certain aspects of like Augustinian thought or eccentricities of the same. I'm very much, I presume I'm mostly broadcasting to Americans here, in the Protestant tradition. In fact, you would not have had a Reformation if Luther. You would not have a Reformation as we know it had Luther not had such a nominalistic distortion in his theology, where you have these false oppositions between freedom and law and works and grace, for instance. Nominalism is this idea that there are not nominalism is this idea that there are categories in philosophy. Antinomianism, nomine meaning the name or the noun, antinomianism, that Luther was influenced by antinomianism, and the entire Protestant tradition is fundamentally antinomian, hence the very muddled theology of the Trinity, which eventually develops, as well as the church, as well as sacraments, as well as morality, in fact, as well as everything, because antinomians don't hold that there are objective categories. So everything eventually merges into a gobbledygook, and then you have your Methodist lesbian minister giving you Welch's grape juice and cupcakes for Holy Communion of a Sunday. Right, that's what antinomianism gets you after 500 years. But again, building off of point 3 at this idea to get the different civilizations religiously and culturally speaking nice to each other, let's say, which has obviously been the policy of the Vatican forever and a day, and certainly in the 20th century, 21st century, evidenced by things like the Abrahamic House of Prayer and the Abu Dhabi document. Likewise, we see the same here with morality. So you try to pull, and you also see that with the titles of these documents, but what you try to do with this rational eudaimonianism is see what is good that you can work with, and then build from that. So you build from these this goodwill that you intuit in the other. Okay, and then there's an explanation here of various of the commandments, not commanders. Okay, and then we'll read here. There are two main types of selective morality. To caricature, we could say that conservatives, especially in the West, focus on the sixth commandment, forgetting the seventh. Then that progressives focus on the seventh, forgetting the sixth. And in this, we could even have that discussion of the Cold War and how the left and the right and the pro-Soviets and then the liberals, how they tended amongst the Christians of those affiliations tended to bifurcate things. And so we see this split, right? You either have a Christianity which is hyper-focused on sexuality and sexual ethics, or Christianity which is hyper-focused on social justice, and ne'er the twain shall meet. Well, that's not normal. These two are actually connected. And so he goes on here, not enough emphasis is placed on this correspondence. and even the near simultaneity between Paul VI, St. Paul VI, Populorum Progressio in 67 and Humanae Vitae in 68. So here we actually see in church documents, not just the listing of the commandments from 3,000 years ago, but also, look at that. Not enough emphasis is placed that, this social justice, Populorum Progressio, which you will hear in certain circles, right, comes right before Humanae Vitae, which you will hear all about in certain circles, right? Your so-called conservative Catholics will tell you, even the rat trads will praise Humanae Vitae, and they'll always use the word prophetic, and maybe they're right to do that, and yet you'll never hear Populorum Progressio mentioned by them, should they know it even exists, and vice versa. If you go down to the Dorothy Day Hospitality House in Danbury, you're going to hear a lot about Populorum Progressio and probably almost nothing about Humanae Vitae. And so this is this strange thing. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's an American thing, why things have to bifurcate like that. I've been thinking a lot about that. Why is it in America you only have the Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo, and there's no influence of one on the other? I know that's not the case in other continents and other countries. I know that's not the case, where there isn't seen as this like yawning gap between this 1960s folk mass, kind of suburban white bread thing, and on one end, and then on the other is the Latin Mass polyphony, and if they could have their sermon in Latin, even though they don't know a word of it, the trads would have that. Like, what is it about the American psychology that has to be bipolar like that, whereas the rest of the world doesn't see it that way, where there's much more influence of different liturgical usages? But I think you see the same bipolarity certainly here in America. Francis, who called abortionists hitmen, knows that social injustice is theft, and that there are sinful economic structures that are dangerously bring property and theft closer together. Regarding the seventh commandment, I would say that Francis's teaching sees the fifth commandment as the one that forms the profound unity of the sixth and seventh commandments. Enslavement to the pursuit of pleasure destroys the purity of the heart, the family, and education. Wow. Enslavement to the pursuit of pleasure destroys the purity of education. That's interesting. We must revisit that in another broadcast. But it also kills outright. Abortion is indeed the ultimate means of contraception that seeks pleasure while rejecting life. In my country, in America here, there's a chain of stores called CVS, Consumer Value Services. CVS, almost nobody knows what that stands for, by the way. And oddly enough, the logo of CVS is a machine heart. Actually, it's a boxy heart. CVS, where you can get your Twizzlers and your soda pop and your microwave popcorn conveniences. CVS, you can also buy abortifacients. In fact, in the past few years, most abortions are done via this Plan B. It's almost outdated to go to an abortion clinic any longer. You can just go to your CVS, and while you buy your Skittles and your pop soda and your newspaper, you can also get your abortion in as well. Not that they do any procedures there, but that you can buy these murder drugs. So it's very interesting, isn't it? Enslavement to the pursuit of pleasure destroys the purity of the heart, the purity of the family, and the purity of education. That is something else. Okay. So whoever puts workers out of work and young people on the street or back into their parents' homes is the first to hire the abortionist as a hitman. It was very embarrassing in the past few years to see these North American commentators, so-called Catholic commentators, actually turning their guns on the pro-life movement, where you would have pro-life people who were actually, so to speak, in the trenches at the rallies, writing the literature, and the pro-life people were taking a cue from the left. One of the very valid criticisms of the left is that look, you people wanted to, outlaw mechanical abortion and bring a baby into this world, and what is the world that you have saved this baby for but a foul and harsh thing? Well, actually, the pro-life movement, very much to his credit, has heeded that very valid criticism and has tried to expand the definition of pro-life, into not just life is sacred from conception to natural death, but also into living structures and into sociology. And how embarrassing it was to see these so-called orthodox loudmouths on the internet turn their guns on the pro-life movement for trying to maturely broaden the understanding of a pro-life philosophy and poo-poo it and say, no, let's just get real. Pro-life means anti-abortion. To just cut to the chase. No, it doesn't. And this again probably gets into something of this bipolar American psychology, which is fundamentally Calvinistic. Actually, a lot of your very devout Roman Catholics in this country are far more influenced by John Calvin and the Reformed tradition than they realize. Far from being a relaxation of morals, this social justice focus is a harsh reminder of the series of sin by which man unites himself with Satan, who is a murderer from the beginning. Francis did not engage in politics in the ordinary sense of the word, but he reminded us that respect for simple natural moral law implies a social doctrine. Francis did not develop this in a particularly conceptual or articulate way, but he did recall its evangelical character. That gets to the final sixth point of our author, that of the valid criticisms of the late Holy Father and his inability to communicate crisply, which allowed for, to quote the Chinese communist, 1,000 schools of thought to arise as to what the hell Pope Francis was saying sometimes. Okay, and then there's a long explanation of Leo the 13th and certain points there, and this comes up earlier in the political meditation as well. Very valuable, certainly valuable given the recent Pope's name of Leo the 14th and the cue he's taking from his nominal predecessor. We must recognize that Francis did not, to my knowledge, make a decisive progress in the social doctrine of the Church that is required today. We would not be attentive to this evangelical denunciation if we equated it with pauperistic sentimentality, sympathetic utopias, or remakers of socialism. We must build something new and solid. Above all, on Leo the 13th, Pius XI, Paul VI, John Paul II, Benedict spoke on the social teaching. Okay, then there's a discussion of natural morality. Leave it to you to get into that. Again, this is all trying to build bridges. That's that word eudaimonism that we looked up. Trying to build bridges with whatever is good in other groups, be that the Muslims, to earlier points, liberalism. There are elements that are good in liberalism, and so forth. So that's eudaimonism. You'll catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, we say in America. Okay, the liturgy, this is part 5. Liturgy does not seem to have been central to the thinking and life of Francis I. It was obviously a fundamental and salutary practice for him, but it also was something that was taken for granted, and his spontaneous questioning focused on other subjects and problems. It seemed that he only really addressed the issue in relation to the traditionalist problem. But benign phenomenon, or as a minority but legitimate component, or as a deviation that calls into question the unity of government, worship, and even faith. Clearly, at the beginning of his pontificate, Pope Francis I had nothing against traditionalists, even the most extreme ones, who were nevertheless heavy vacantists. That is to say, they did not believe that Pope Francis was Pope. During the whole year of 2016, he even granted the latter the right to validly administer the sacraments. That's particularly the SSPX. Then the relationship deteriorated. I I was involved, in one of these SSPX congregations at the time, and I can give you some, from a layman's perspective, some background baseball to that whole time period, at least from a very removed perch. Because at the same time, the SSPX was trying to come back into the Catholic Church, and there was a revolt of the laity and the lower clergy. Very interesting time period, and that helps explain why these olive branches, like um, things with the sacraments and marriage and confession in particular, I seem to recall, were given the faculties to the SSPX, and then that was all the olive branch that the church was trying to show to the schismatics. And then the relationship deteriorated because the laity and the lower clergy amongst the traditionalist schismatics revolted almost exactly in the way that the Orthodox fanatics revolted after the Council of Pisa-Ferrata in the 16th century, 15th century. And so anyway, things deteriorated from there. There was all sorts of internal communications that were released, and it was a very unseemly time. Actually, it was actually this very time that I realized the dead end of certain communities. Anyhow, here again, it is possible that this so-called traditionalism, which gradually appeared negative to him, was above all American traditionalism. The traditionalist problem thus became one-dimensional of the overall problem of the spiritual geopolitics of the time. The question arises, moreover, outside Catholicism and even Christianity. The liturgical question would therefore depend on traditionalist question, which itself can only be analyzed as one aspect of the relationship between Pope Francis I and the U.S. It is not very easy for a South American, especially an Argentinian, of modest origin and patriotic, who loves the people, to love the U.S. Perceived as an imperial power, a plutocratic oligarchy unconcerned with social issues, whose influence is very negative, promoting both a secularized culture that become Nietzschean and almost nihilistic, and an evangelical Protestant culture whose relationship with the liberal world has become nihilistic and, whose relationship with a liberal world that has become nihilistic is highly ambiguous. Evangelical Protestant culture's relationship with the liberal world has become highly ambiguous. Okay, I understand. Francis did not seem to have been very interested in these United States any more than in Europe. It was almost as if he had written them off, focusing all his energy on the more dynamic, more sympathetically poor, less corrupt parts of the world. It also seems that Jorge Bergoglio had retained a burning emotional memory of his youth. This could be summed up by recalling his remark to a member of the upper middle class: "How much do you pay your maid?" The Catholic radtrads, especially the North American variety, God help us, reputed to be bourgeois, supporters of capitalism, imperialism, militarism, unchallenged authority, clericalism, that is to say, supporters of a liturgy reputed to be inaccessible to the uncultured masses, suspicious or hostile to Vatican II, cold towards the conciliar papacy, and on top of that, having children like rabbits, ended up representing in Francis's eyes the quintessence of the detestable. Since their rallying point was the Mass of St. Pius V, the temptation was strong to ban it in order to disperse them, reduce them to obedience, or force them out of the church. I don't think the intention of things like Traditionis Custodes was deliberately to force people into, orthodoxy or something like that. But I did think certain statements and certain behaviors were unduly provocative to a group of people that is a little bit trigger happy to begin with. But here is actually a very good litany of some of the internal contradictions of North American Christians: bourgeois, capitalistic, imperialistic, militaristic, clerical. Some of the other points you could pussyfoot around, but there's a lot of anti-Christian elements in so-called conservative Christianity, conservative Catholicism here in America. And that's worth bringing up, and that's worth needling. That's worth needling. You don't, again, some of the stuff was a little bit provocative, outright provocative for simple laymen. I don't care how much they know. These on YouTube are simple people, and you don't need to be unduly provoking them because they may act rationally and leave the church altogether for some sect or other. Okay, so the final point of this article by Henry Houdet gets into, there we go, part 6, which are the valid criticisms of Pope Francis and how that can illuminate things going forward. So I'll just read the last couple paragraphs and we'll put a bow on things. Okay. In this confusion, the ultra-progressives who have never renounced any of their pet ideas, even when they are nothing more than old chestnuts, were pushing their agenda without apparently encountering any resistance. While denunciation and repression seem unleashed on those who are too free or too traditional. Overall, this gives the impression that Rome now favored a relaxation of morals, which indeed was not the case. See part 4 above. And intended to depart, this is the misinterpretation, from the traditional moral doctrine of the church, to plan a transgressive of the relativistic culture of the Western world. The Pope himself said that there was already Protestant churches in Germany, and that there was no need to imitate the original. Fair enough. But then why did he allow everything to drift? It is obvious that if such a drift were to continue, a schism would have occurred, as in the Anglican Church. But did the Pope really allow it? A leader is forced to take into account the irrational exuberance of the media and proceed with discretion, while the public judges everything without reflecting on the complexities of the situation. Keep in mind that part 6 here is encountered and entitled that being a pope is a difficult job. Right? There are elements to office, any office, that are not going to be immediately discernible in a news story. And there are elements to power and power dynamics, which almost none of us have experience dealing with. And we have to take that into account, whether that's the town mayor or the head of the library or the governor or the Pope or any civil or religious or any leader whatsoever, even in a family, that there are dynamics of power that we are very likely unaware of, and that individual, whoever they may be, are taking that into account, and that we may not be able to see all of the nuts and bolts that go into that, and that lead to sometimes behaviors and statements and things that seem to us to not make sense. I will conclude, our author says, with 2 sentences. Francis's magisterium is valuable, sometimes highly original, and deserves to be studied, but above all explained and translated into logical terms. At the end of the day, these years paradoxically strengthen the faith in the church as firmly held in Christ's hands. Credo urum sanctum catholicum et apostolicum ecclesiam. Okay, grand. So there we go. Just a little introduction to Henry Houdet's article, some thoughts on the papacy of Pope Francis I, published in the Apostle magazine. You can see that linked down below. So some good things to think about there as we bring the bird down in this June edition of Christian History and Ideas. And we certainly have a lot to think about just from that article alone, to say nothing of the other fine publications on the Apostle this month. I think it's going to be a long time for the world, for historians, for the church to chew through and chew over the papacy of Pope Francis, Lord have mercy on him, to say nothing of Pope Benedict or St. John Paul II and so forth. The papacy is a vast office in many regards, and the administration of a papacy is the same. And the world is, I suppose, equally as vast. And so these things do take a long time to meditate over and to work through. And sometimes, oftentimes, what seems as contradictions and so forth can be contextualized appropriately. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I have, this June 2025 edition of Christian History and Ideas. You can access the article down below, as I say, in the possible. You can also access previous episodes from the description. And then, would you kindly head over to Apocalypsis Institute and see all the great stuff we have going on here in Connecticut and online, including a full semester course, private course, given over to Christian history and ideas. This show just a lot more deep. Okay, thank you so much and have a great day and a great June. Valete.